Welcome back to Perp Games as our summer spectacular continues with the release of Maid of Sker on PlayStation 4. It's coming, as you may have seen, to Xbox One next week in EU territories, and September NA territories will be able to get a copy of the game on both PS4 and Xbox One. So yeah, just want to quickly show this before we dive into the game. You can actually play all of Maid of Sker in Welsh, as you can see from the screen there. And I think it really sort of speaks to someone like me who's got a Welsh heritage and based in Cardiff. We don't really get to see much Welsh heritage in video games much anymore. It's one of the untapped areas of our kind of legend and history, and that's essentially really what the deep dive of Maid of Sker is all about. It's all about Welsh folklore and the story of the Maid of Sker, but essentially it kind of like is an adaptation of that story rather than a true recollection of it. So there's obviously a bit of poetic license in there. For instance, it's taking place in Sker Hotel at Sker Point. You're visiting Sker Station, so there's a bit of poetic license in here, but the game essentially really is a homage to that Welsh legend. And I think sort of seeing that and able to play the game in Welsh as well is a real testament to, you know, how much care and attention and detail that Wales Interactive have put into this, how much passion they have for, the folklore itself and for, the entire legacy of Welsh history. And really wanted to represent that in a video game, which is essentially it's a Welsh horror game, which it's unprecedented, and it's really exciting for me personally to get to work on this game and to be able to play it through for you today.
Your love, always, Elizabeth.
So you can see in the opening section of the game here, you're seeing that I'm actually visiting Sker. I'm about to head to Sker Point at Sker Station, and you're going to get to see basically that my character is in search of Elizabeth Williams, who has been called to Sker Hotel to basically do a nice rendition of. She's got a fantastic singing voice, so she's doing a nice rendition of some classic Welsh tunes and folklore. It's quite an intimidating prospect of all the things that are to come, because not everything is going to go to plan for poor Elizabeth. So essentially in Maid of Sker, you don't really have weapons to your disposal, so you really kind of have to rely on your ability to stay quiet, essentially. There's actually a mechanic in Maid of Sker where you can hold your breath, which again is quite unique and not something you see very often in games. You can actually suffocate yourself by, holding on for too long. So you have to be very careful of that as well. But in Maid of Sker, you are basically against enemies that are called the Quiet Ones. So you can infer from that yes, they are actually very sensitive to sound, and they're going to react to any sort of noise that you make as well. So you're going to have to be very cautious, very careful, and taking your steps lightly. Crouch is going to be encouraged. There are some mechanics and gadgets that can help you over the course of the game when you come to those a bit later on, but essentially, you're going to stand yourself in good stead if you get into the habit of being very silent and quiet as you're walking around Sker Hotel and its surrounding perimeter. So you can see there, you pick up a lot of music sheets as well. Music is really, really essential and core to this game. As I mentioned, it's very much deep drenched in Welsh folklore. There's actually some classic Welsh tunes in there, some Welsh hymns that I would have sung as a child, including Callum Lum. You may have seen that Perp Games has done a vinyl for this as well, along with Wales Interactive. That celebrates all the beautiful music that has been put together in this game. And it's obviously remanaging of famous Welsh hymns, as I mentioned, like Callum Lum, which is A Pure Heart, and Sorgan, which is a Welsh lullaby. It's all come from Tia Kalmaru, who's a beautiful voice, beautiful rendition of some of these tracks. It's a stunning reimagining of these amazing pieces of music and these classic pieces of music that are so deeply entrenched in Welsh folklore. And again, as I mentioned, for me personally, and for many people who I've been speaking to locally here, this is a very exciting game. This is kind of it puts Wales on the map in some ways. As I mentioned, we don't get a lot of attention in terms of games. A lot of games are putting together, but this is really exciting for us. So you see now that I'm taking the first steps onto Sker Point, and I think something really needs to be said. I think when I first saw the trailer for this game, before it was officially announced that we were doing the physical release for this, before I'd even worked on Maid of Sker, I realised that how much of a step up in quality this is compared to everything that Wales Interactive have done before. One thing I've always loved about Wales Interactive as a studio is every release that they have done feels like it's an evolution of the previous release. And Maid of Sker really feels like all lessons learned from past games. It feels like a culmination of their development journey over a period of years. And, I think this is, for me, one thing I love about just this particular scene that you're walking through here is the forestry effect. Seeing the size of the trees as you're walking along, and seeing the strewn confetti around, which is obviously you've seen better days, and it's so atmospheric and it's so poignant, and it looks stunning. I'm playing this on just a PlayStation 4 standard, but put this in a PS4 Pro, play it on your PC, you actually get 4K if you play it on PC, 4K uncapped at 1080p 60 frames a second. But as mentioned, there's also enhancements if you've got it on PlayStation 4 Pro or Xbox One X. This, it looks stunning already, right? So you give that the extra oomph that it needs for performance power, and it's going to look even better. It's going to perform even better. So you're in for a real treat. I think the atmosphere in this game for me is the real sort of selling point of Maid of Sker. The outdoor environments they look absolutely spectacular. And I think the art team should be hugely commended for the time, the effort, the detail they've put into this. I'm just playing the piano here. You can actually play some of the music sheets you can collect. You can actually play out some of the tracks from that on a piano, or you can just have a bit of fun. It's that's cool little details that are just hidden in the game that you could just have a bit of fun with. They're not necessarily core or integral to the main storyline, but sometimes they can obviously contribute to that storyline, or they can have an impact. It's wonderful. So what you've seen there as well, the iconograph there, that you can actually, those are your kind of saving, you hit those and you can actually save your game. So it kind of like throws back to the homage of the typewriters in Resident Evil, right? Where, you put the ink, except you don't have to have an ink ribbon on you in order to save the game. You can just literally tap those. What is really quite unique about these in Maid of Sker is that, rather than just being this arbitrary kind of typewriter or this iconograph in the world, which you select and you click on and you save the game, it actually, each one tells you a different portion of the past story. So it all contributes to the wider narrative. So in some respects, you're kind of almost encouraged to save your game in Maid of Sker, because you actually learn more about the game itself. You learn more about the world that you're in. You learn more about, the characters. And it gives you an added perspective, I guess. I guess you could skip it, but it adds a perspective which you may not have got had you decided not to save your game at that particular moment. It's really, really quite cool. Maid of Sker is just, for me, it's really been a pleasure to work on a title as well that's just, again, obviously I've mentioned how much of a personal connection it has to me, where I'm based. Obviously I mentioned the graphics, but I really want to again illustrate how important audio and music is and sound effects to this game. It's one of these games when they say to you put headphones on to play this game, because sound is so critical to your the way that you venture around. You've got to be careful you're not making too much noise from your footsteps, but also kind of the haunting lullabies that you can hear in the background. They really kind of lure you towards the house. It almost reminds me a little bit of that scene in The Little Mermaid where Ursula's kind of got Ariel's voice in a kind of in the brooch she's got around her neck, and it's kind of like it's gradually luring her in. It's kind of that sort of sense of tension and atmosphere, and just that sense of foreboding. I really have. I think it's one of these games that everything seems to come together really well, and it plays really well as well. Obviously there's a lot of things you can find. Obviously there's a lot of hidden extras, a lot of notes and archives you can pick up and learn more about the world and characters, and what's been happening at Sker Hotel, what the event was Elizabeth Williams was invited to, all these kinds of things that just teach you more about what's happening around you. And even this, from an aesthetical point of view, obviously you can see a lot of that as well. And you can see I've really been taking my time getting to Sker Hotel, because I'm just really mesmerized by everything. I'm one of these kind of players that likes to absorb every detail. And obviously if you wanted to watch a video that kind of like takes you through the game point to point, this is not that video, unfortunately. I'm not going to spoil too much for you, because I think this is the kind of game you need to experience for yourself. You really kind of take it in, get all those details for yourself. But I just want to really sort of commend and show off some of the game's best points, I think, some of the game's real sort of selling points to you, and what makes it so special and unique. Because horror games, I think, obviously Maid of Sker definitely has its dark moments, but I think horror games are generally considered to be like very dark, very menacing, you almost like you can't see the screen sometimes. And as I mentioned, Maid of Sker definitely has those moments in it as well, don't get me wrong. But I think, the contrast in the opening of the game compared to when you're in the hotel is fascinating, because you're seeing so much light, you're seeing so much vibrancy, you're seeing so much beauty. And then you enter the hotel and everything is just destroyed, and everything is torn asunder, and everything is dark and bleak, and and that I think really sets a unique tone as well. And I think one thing as well that I've noticed is that Maid of Sker isn't afraid to show some of its influences on its sleeve as well. I mean, you'll come to it in a little bit, but you might have already got some slight Bioshock vibes from this as well. Some of that is definitely celebrated within Scare Hotel as well, for little Easter eggs you might be able to find. And it also celebrates some of the other great horror games that we've seen as well, like some of the effects that you've that recognized from other games. But as mentioned, it also very much stands on its own. It's very unique as a horror experience. And just purely because of the Welsh culture that's really, really entangled in all of this and really sort of brought the story forward. You can see obviously as well, this is not set in the modern era either. This is set in the 1800s. So yeah, you're seeing obviously that there's that perspective as well, which is quite, I think there's a lot of modern psychological horrors now, and you're seeing a lot of futuristic psychological horrors and horrors instead of, maybe just 20 years ago. But this is very much ingrained in the past. And I guess it kind of like sets it from films as well. I mean, you could obviously compare this to like The Woman in Black. It's obviously got that kind of legacy and history to it as well. Oh, another little cool note to make as well. You may notice there it says at the top there, a bit of Welsh saying for you. It's croeso, which is welcome. So there you go. You can see that at the top there on the banners. And I think one other thing you can see about Maid of Sker as well is that you can open little hidden areas like this here, so you can get some. You can go around the back behind the counter. You can hear a phone ringing in the background, and they obviously got the old classic phones. So you're not going to get there's no mobile phones to be found here like there is in the likes of Blair Witch. This is all very old school. So yeah, essentially this is, though, it's a first-person survival horror. It's set in this remote hotel. You're learning a little bit more about the story here now with Elizabeth. So you're actually chatting to Elizabeth for the very first time through phone calls. You get to have several conversations throughout the course of the game, learning more about her plight, learning more about the history of the hotel, and obviously getting a better understanding of some strategy on how to deal with the quiet ones, who are very, very intimidating. They can definitely be quite intimidating when they get up close to you as well. But the game definitely has, like a supernatural element to it as well. Obviously, it's. I think there was a lot to be said of the 1800s. There was always that feeling of supernatural and mystery, which there was that feeling of the untapped within the sort of the, films and the stories and the games that really focus on that time period. And this really sort of celebrates that. And I think Wales Interactive also learned a lot, from because we previously published Don't Knock Twice for them, which is another fantastic horror game that they've done, but they've learned a lot from games like that, and also like they've also had a fantastic writing team in as well, who've worked on games like Soma, which was another fantastic horror game. If you've not played that, you really should. And I think that just really sort of shows you the heritage, the horror heritage that is sort of behind Maid of Sker. These people know how to make a horror game. They've made good ones in the past, and they've made another great one here.
If all of the cylinders are played together on the harmonium, this madness will end.
So the sound-based system is essentially your core survival mechanic in the game. So as I mentioned, you do get some gadgets that will help you, but sound is really crucial. And that sort of goes back to my point about, headphones. Like you need to listen for the noise that you're making. You need to listen to the sounds that are happening in the background. That really influences and, determines the decision-making that you should and shouldn't be doing at this point. That's a nice homage, by the way, to the original Maid of Sker, Prudence Williams there. So, the game does definitely celebrates that heritage. But, there's also a unique system in the game as well, which is a nudge system. So if you bump into an object, like sort of going back to the sound-based system, if you bump into objects, you will make a noise as well, which is actually surprisingly quite, it's not a feature that's been explored too much in horror games. You have to be so careful on the path that you're taking as well, not just in the kind of like the footsteps you're making. See that you actually see something written in blood there. So, the game really does test your, ability to stay on the quiet side. And playing the piano is definitely not on the quiet side. But I think with this certainly Maid of Sker, it's been a real pleasure to work on a game that. We announced that we were working on Maid of Sker for quite some time. It's been in development for quite some time now. It's only just released, and it's a real pleasure to work on a game. One of the biggest independent games this summer. It's coming from a fantastic independent studio. There's some fantastic talent behind this as well. It's been well received. It's a real pleasure to work on a physical distribution on a game like this, and it's also great to bring it again to Xbox as well. We don't see. We've obviously released a lot of PlayStation 4 games. We've released some Nintendo Switch games, but it's great to also bring titles to Xbox One as well, because we've got there's a huge audience base there, and obviously as we move towards the next generation, there's going to be some interesting developments there in terms of Xbox distribution, games that are already existing on that hardware, and PlayStation 4 likewise. And obviously as mentioned as well, Maid of Sker has been announced to be coming to Nintendo Switch, and we will have some more information on that in the coming weeks ahead. So stay tuned for that. If you're waiting for the game on Nintendo Switch, you really should. It's definitely one of those games that feels like it could be at home on portable as well. But yeah, this is Maid of Sker, and you encounter this guy you're actually encountering here. It's not just Elizabeth you're going to be talking to. There are other characters you're going to interact with. Hopefully not too much in earshot of the quiet ones. But it will the story will develop in some interesting and unexpected ways for sure.
Throw yourself into it.
But the key thing for you is obviously picking up these cylinders. I don't know if you caught in the conversation I had with Elizabeth before. There are cylinders hidden throughout the hotel, and you need to collect these cylinders to actually create the lullaby, which will enable you to progress into the final stages of the game as well. I obviously don't want to talk too much in detail about that, but there is some very interesting. You obviously make sure to collect as many of those as you can, and keep an eye out for them, because they're going to be in all sorts of places. And just looking at the lighting effects in this as well. It really is. Maid of Sker it's a very intimidating atmospheric game for sure. And you've probably noticed there is obviously some references there. The supernatural element is really sort of shown off in elements like that. But this is not your conventional hotel. This is not a This is not a Holiday Inn. This is not a travel lodge. If you went into a travel lodge, you probably wouldn't be expecting to see this kind of stuff. There's definitely an element to this hotel that makes it quite unsettling for a person who's looking for somewhere to stay. I probably wouldn't be booking a reservation myself there personally, but it's nice to visit. And again, the use of the lighting in what I think is great as well. Obviously, I mentioned horror games. You always see like the dark and the dreariness of it, but Wales Interactive have not been afraid to make use of lighting in Maid of Sker, and they've done it in very effective and smart ways. So I'm actually coming to a close on this video now. I'm not going to spoil too much more. Don't know if you noticed that as well. There's a nice little Easter egg for celebrating Cthulhu. So Call of Cthulhu games as well with the octopus. So there's lots of hidden influences and Easter eggs all throughout Maid of Sker that's definitely worth keeping an eye out for. But yeah, this is going to wrap it up for this video. As I mentioned, Maid of Sker is now available in the EU territories on PlayStation 4, Xbox One from next week, and September NA territories are going to be able to pick up a physical edition of the game as well. But I hope you've enjoyed this brief look at the game. It's now available. Make sure to check it out. If you love horror games, you're going to absolutely adore Maid of Sker. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.